We're back with a new episode of Talking with Doyle. I'm Hunter Kipe, and I'm joined with, of course, Representative Doyle Heffley. And we have a special guest joining us today, Representative Brian Cutler, who represents the 100th District, which is southern Lancaster, and he is also our minority leader. Doyle, what are we talking about today?
So we're going to talk a little bit about how the House, with the gerrymandered Democratic majority, how they're conducting business on the House. And the most recent thing that they've introduced is a House Resolution 412, which many of us find to be very undemocratic, if you want to say it in that sense. But there was an issue on the floor a few weeks ago when a member of the majority caucus was voting by absentee, as you can vote, and but he had some issues going on back in his district, and in which we didn't feel it was appropriate that he would be voting at the time, and the Democrats kind of blocked that, and there's been somewhat of a conspiracy around that. I don't know that we'll dive into that, but at the end of the day, the issue came about that you can vote by proxy and have somebody vote for you, and that really started during COVID, and the Democrats kept that in the rules. So with that said, they're trying to come up with a way to let the majority party kind of have control over which members are voting on the floor. Brian, you made some really good remarks on the House floor when this came up. If you just want to elaborate a little bit on what House Resolution 412 does and how anti-democracy it is, if you want to say
Yeah,
that.
thanks, Doyle. And you're absolutely right. It's very anti-democratic. When you look at everything that's been going on the House floor and in the committees with amendments and bills, there's one overwhelming thing that you have to keep at the forefront, and that is the House Democrats will do whatever they need to in order to maintain power. It's not about advancing good ideas. It's not about solving problems. It's certainly not about passing a budget on time. For them, it's all about maintaining the majority so that they are the ones who are making the choices. And the best example that you kind of opened with is there was a member who had some legal issues back in their district. It was widely documented, and we simply asked for that gentleman to be placed on leave. The House Democrats insisted that they could legally vote him, and because of that, we ultimately challenged it on the floor. They held that he could, in fact, continue to vote, and they would direct his vote. And so the question really is what were his residents being appropriately represented in that area? I don't think so, which is why we raised the objections. So because of the attention that we drew to this individual and the issues that back home in the district, the House Democrats' answer was to come up with this fake committee that will determine if somebody is eligible or not, competent enough or not, in order to vote on the House floor.
Which is kind of an oxymoron when you look at some of the members of the majority caucus, and they're going to determine who should be eligible and who's competent enough to vote on the House floor, when they just voted and upheld that if there's a warrant out for your arrest, that you can still be voting on the House floor. But now those same folks are going to determine who's eligible to vote on the House floor. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No, it certainly doesn't make a lot of sense. When you look at the mechanics of the committee, it's made up of both leaders, both caucus chairs, and then the speaker. So it's a 3-2 partisan committee. Most times in other committees, when we deal with sensitive issues that deal specifically with members, such as the Ethics Committee, it's an even split so that it's not a partisan committee. And what this will ultimately result in, I think, is strictly partisan decisions. When you look at the mechanics of how the report comes out, only the majority gets to write the report. Only the majority vote will carry that report. So there is no minority opinion. There is no further findings of fact that can be shared. It will be strictly up to the 3 Democrats that are on the committee. That's the first problem. The second problem is the power to put you in front of that committee is solely vested in the leader of each caucus. The leader can refer a member to this committee to be adjudicated. And I just think that's fundamentally unfair.
Really what you could have is you could have the majority leader who they have a 1-vote majority, and maybe say go to a minority member and say, look, I want you to vote this way, and if you don't, I'm going to refer you to the committee, which I control, to say that you're not competent to be on the House floor. I mean, that really sets up, a lot of, it could be a very corrupt process. We already have an ethics committee, which is a bipartisan ethics committee, and there's even members of the majority and the minority party. And when the House Republicans maintained a majority of 122 members to 80-some members, we still had the ethics committee was still a bipartisan committee. So we already have a process. I mean, just this House resolution doesn't pass a smell test, and really just is a major power grab by the majority party.
Absolutely. When you look at any committee that kind of governs the governing of our chamber, whether it's the ethics committee for us as individual members or the bipartisan management committee, which that one is a truly partisan committee. It's 3-2. It's the speakers, the whips, and then the leaders, so it's a total of 5 members. However, both of those committees require votes from both sides in order to advance issues. And that is the fundamental difference between the governing of the chamber versus this committee that was just created with this resolution.
And it really seems like the House Democrats are following kind of this national model of if you can't win at the ballot box or if you can't win with your ideas, then you use what we're seeing nationally is, arrest your opponents or put your opponents on trial. But what we're seeing here is if you can't get the votes that you need, now you're going to come after people and say that we're going to run you in front of this committee, which we control, and we're going to tell people that you're not fit to be voting on the House floor. And it's disturbing because that's not democracy. And for as often as they like to stand up on the floor and say they're defending democracy, this is totally against democracy.
Yeah, I think when you look at many of their actions they've taken on the floor this session, from not recognizing members who were seeking to be recognized either in the committee or on the floor, to ruling amendments consistently out of order, probably close to 36 times their own members have refused to stand for interrogation and answer simple questions about their bills.
That is mind-blowing to me. If you're going to be coming to bringing a bill to the House floor, that bill has to be vetted. You have to understand that your name's on that bill. To then not stand up and when a member has questions about that, and there's been legitimate questions that were needed to be asked, so it's hard to say we're going to vote for it or against it if the maker of the bill isn't comfortable enough. How do they even know what's in the bill if they're not willing to stand up and defend it on the House floor?
Well, I think you're 100% correct on that one, Doyle, because if you can't explain your bill and answer simple questions about it on the House floor, it's probably not ready for prime time.
Yeah.
And time again, what we've seen demonstrated is the refusal to answer even the most basic questions. And that is not how democracy works, but it's clearly how the House Democratic Caucus works.
And it really comes down to the institution. Since I've been here in Harrisburg and currently in my 7th term, the respect of the institution. Whether the Democrats are in charge, the Republicans are in charge, it's an institution. I know a lot of people say when they come out here to the Capitol, they comment how beautiful the Capitol is, and somebody said it's a temple to democracy. The House is an institution, how we govern, the rules that we adopt, and everybody adopts them early on, and following those rules so we can govern, whether it be the different things, how we conduct business on the House floor. You have to have a jacket on. We address each other by the county that you come from, the gentleman from Lancaster County, the gentleman from Carbon County, the gentlewoman from Monroe County. However, because we want to elevate the debate to not make it personal. So making it really personal like that, setting up a committee like this, I think really degrades the whole institution of the House, and it's very troubling.
Yeah, you're correct again. And I know that it probably doesn't seem important to a lot of the listeners, but the decorum of the House and the way that we approach each other is absolutely essential to solving the problems that we face. Because if you can't show respect to each other and the process, then you really are discounting all of the people that we each represent by ignoring us.
Yeah, each member represents approximately 65,000 people, and they have a voice, and we are their voice on the House floor.
But me, being a constituent, I have 2 questions, especially for the viewers back home. Obviously, we understand the process and how things work on the House floor. When you say place on leave, what does that include? What does that entail? Like, who qualifies to be placed on leave for the day, and what does that mean?
Anybody can be placed on leave. It just simply means that you are currently not available to be able to vote on issues. Prior to COVID and prior to remote voting, you were placed on leave anytime you left the House floor because you weren't in the immediate vicinity to vote. Post-COVID, and the Democrats certainly expanded the meaning of that rule, they simply allow members not just to vote from their offices, as we often did, to limit the number of members on the floor, but now you can literally vote from anywhere. And so when we asked for members to be placed on leave, and I'll give you a good example, we had a member who was speaking at his grandmother's funeral just last week, and he has to be placed on leave because he wasn't readily available to be monitoring session and communicate with the whip how he intended to vote.
So that makes a good point, too, because I actually remember you speaking on the House floor talking about why this certain member should be placed on leave because of the legal issues that were going on down in his district. So that would make sense, too, because if his vote counted, was that going by the whip then, or how? So how was that?
So you have remote voting. It's something that came about during COVID, as you just explained. So you can either, if you're on the floor and a vote is called, you have to vote. You can't not vote, right? You have to push the button, yay or nay. If you
There's no maybe button.
And then you can vote remotely, and this came about during COVID because people, if they were around somebody with COVID, they weren't going to come to the House floor, so we allowed them to vote. And so you fill out and you would monitor, and you would have the whip would vote for you.
But nonetheless, you're still communicating between
and you're communicating.
people.
So the problem is, if somebody goes on leave, if somebody's speaking at a funeral service or somebody, there are legitimate reasons that people have to go on leave, and then you go on leave and you don't vote. But if you're going to remote vote, you have to be attentive to the process, and I would say in this example, that member was not. We're not quite sure where he was, and that's a whole nother fiasco we're not going to dive into right now.
I don't think we have time for that.
Yeah, maybe a future episode, though, on that. But, so it's a tremendous responsibility. I know when I first came in, when I was first elected, I remember sitting in a room and kind of explaining the processes, and Mike Terzai was a leader at the time, and he looked at all the freshman members. He said, the most important thing, your number one responsibility, what you can do, is to be on the floor and vote. You're the only person out of 65,000 people in your district that can push that button, yay or nay, to represent them. And I think what's happening now with the Democrat majority is they're kind of making a mockery of that.